this is Vernal. Can you see and hear us?
Children's out trying to centralize their effort.
Can you hear us?
Concern is that we're going to implement them into it.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Should do a mistake. We can tell you that. I have to think about that.
Okay, so yeah, we got planning, but we're expecting not there.
We got
They have left down because they are old, primarily by the
I mean, literally, we get help more than a dozen.
Otherwise, I would say let's get them off.
No, that's not the ones who are in the clinic who need those counselors. Those are the calls. And then, like, sometimes
Bounce a police. Did them at home.
yeah, you did them at home.
Yeah, I will just fucking
Because it recognizes it's a lot of work and there's a way you can possibly maintain insurance. I'm like, we can't be doing that. We have the ones that our patients go to come back and say, this place was really wonderful. This person helps my child with special
So the Sheehan's with Kitty Corner.
So your slides not visible.
Right.
He's one of my street Sheehan's.
I can see it on my screen over here.
Pediatric one.
So the Sheehan's.
And I was just like, and she's
wonderful. Like, trying to get it free authorization for Boston.
and she's like, well, someone's been helping me from Select Health, and her name's Pat. And I'm like, oh, you're in great hands. Like, that's going on. I'm sure that's going on.
There are some Friday, Monday, and Tuesday we're working on this case, and I just want to keep my head. That's what I'm going to start saying.
And there's no time for it. Some of your care managers have been so good on some of our cases. Like when I really hit the wall against like home health barriers because like I need an alcohol working or something, I just call them.
Still, I'm not even in the house. Ordered. You can take that.
I want Morrissey. I'm going to switch it.
Hi, good morning. How are you guys?
If you can't provide
Because I'm so good at seeing this So they either need to panel everybody or they need to be willing to approve everyone as an exception. And I haven't had any problems with that.
Good. Yeah.
And then
Oh, good. We're just taking a line.
Say Jan. I wasn't sure. So I met her because I wanted to.
And she was the one who
And it just so happened that like I saw her at the right time, like lunch or something like that. So I'm fortunate that Gabby's going to have a great camp. I said, oh, 10 cards, we use these. So
And you can go tell everybody knows what you do.
there's
No,
some
he's
non-grata here for
things aren't like ours.
okay,
Serve.
and then I contract tells
But
me
they're
that
like they're NAs or
I should have my medical record.
She's Angie. Angie.
I would start and just say, here's what our attempts
so it kind of depends on
tell me what the process is.
So we have a
And
lot
there's a
of
couple of people
so we have team managers.
I wondered if that was circulating. Yeah, so and talking to me online.
or if you want, I know.
That's awesome. But I think she'll be a part of the team now.
I know, but my
Second first.
That's going to be really good.
That'll take a little bit.
great,
So,
great. So
Yep, we've seen some of our
actually, I have
of
enough
your
of
programs as well. And it's kind of funny because
okay.
it's just I'm like,
question for you. It's so personal, it's not even funny. Oh, my daughter's living down your way. Okay.
Good. Well, we do appreciate it.
I like the. I think that they're starting to get more like overflow referrals. Students.
I know, right? Because you were like,
I know. And then
Going down the hill,
there's been some patients that are.
oh, Granger. No, Grandview. Okay, I'll tell her Grandview.
and then there is a family medicine. I think there's more on the IHCs, but it's
She's like 22, and I'm like, you can't come back to the pediatrician anymore. And she's like,
The ever matters different now.
And it was really
I think there's a lot. I think it's a lot.
so she's like, totally kidding her. And I'm like,
Utilities are generally included. Amberly is
I went and talked to her.
she's there today. She just didn't information. She's kind of look now you're maybe thank you.
That's one of the perks, right? Yeah. You would think. I mean, she has any doctors.
It's provided for, and I believe that also starts with the sick patient. Exactly. Much of come in and just and it's young women.
I know. I on to get that before. Can I see? Yes.
Awesome, yes. So good to see you.
So I have just use it.
You know what? Come on over. I just gotta know, yes.
Then they call me and they say,
Yeah, I told her.
and I said, that's yes, because I could drive to right now on the bike. Family look at it.
like that would be totally fine.
You still feel like a kid.
Yep, it's hard to grow up.
They said, okay, why not? What about the slope?
But I was asking.
Oh, well, we didn't address that.
You said this is good. Oh, and they have to put leveling and stuff on it.
Out then to make sure that works. In the meantime, I call the concrete stain guy because I'm like, I can't hear you with the floor.
I have a little different schedule.
Is this for downstairs?
How are you doing? He's coming tomorrow.
Really good.
Concrete stain
Yeah.
and the flooring guy. They can fight with each other. Maybe I'll get a better deal.
But Ashley gets here at 8 now.
And then the doggy door people.
Yeah, things have been very
It's whipsaw.
I mean, sorry, not sorry.
So for us, we typically slow down. Just,
Oh, you do?
yeah, just because.
I have a washer and dryer. Why?
No, I mean,
See, that's.
right on. And they're gonna deliver it.
They deliver, they remove the old one, and they install.
The only one I want to do.
And they install. No.
Which we totally understand. I don't know that things come pretty amazing.
Yep.
It's a long time for 4 weeks later.
Right.
So there's this kind of like in-between.
So it was $5 cheaper for the washer and $5 cheaper for the
We're
machine
just gonna kind of limit
or dryer
Christmas.
than ever throughout this month. And they do installation in Holloway, delivery installation in Holloway for free. But you know, like at Home Depot and at Home Depot, Sears,
So I'll say,
and Best Buy. Yes, for Holloway, you get charged for installing, you get charged for delivery.
yeah, I think I had it for like $20.
But I don't care. Why do I have to refer to that?
Our single wiring Medicaid was kind of pissed me off. Because I think I just drunk the grab and washer right here.
Then on top of
That's
it,
awesome.
I use my executive membership. I got money back.
Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We might have a few people still coming in, but let's go ahead and use this time. So I'm so happy to see so many people here in person. We're grateful that you found some time in what I think is probably a pretty busy week. It is in our neck of the woods. So thanks very much, and help yourself, please, throughout the meeting. We've got corner bakery stuff this morning, so please don't hesitate to get up and fill your plate. Let's see. So here's our agenda today. We'll start with some introductions. And yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that now? And Gabby, it's always best, I think, if we go to meetings people first, and then I don't forget about it.
All right. All right, so we have Melinda Tibbles on the phone. Melinda, can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Melinda Tibbles from Utah Valley Pediatrics Tinoga's office. I'm the care coordinator here.
Thank you. Linda, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Linda Stevenson. I'm the care coordinator for the Richfield Clinic.
Kelsey, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Kelsey.
Your audio is very bad, so I understood that you're care coordinator.
Landing. Landing, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. Welcome.
Caller number 2, could you please tell us your name? There's one person on the phone. Ashley? Ashley, can you introduce yourself, please? Or you can write in a text box, in a chat box, and I can read it out loud. While you do that, I'm going to introduce myself. So my name is Gabi Baragoshi. I'm a quality improvement specialist at UPIC and also helping Mindy a little bit on the medical home portal.
Oh, so we have another caller.
Oh, we have caller number 3.
So just for folks on GoToMeeting and anyone who will join in the future, if you call in, we don't have the ability to see who you are. If you join by, for instance, phone and computer, then you could be muted, and that's helpful to us. So if the callers are unable to actually unmute and use audio, if they wouldn't mind maybe just shooting me a quick email letting me know who they were, that they attended by phone, that would be super less anticipation. You should on GoToMeeting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And my name is Mindy Fuller, and I manage Connected Home Portal. I think most of you know me, but I facilitate these meetings. Gabby's introduced herself, and so, sorry, Angie, you're up next.
What? Oh my.
That's all right. On the spot, but we're just starting with the introduction.
Fantastic. I'm Angie Richins with Alpine Pediatrics.
I'm Nicole Ray. I'm a adolescent and young adult patient navigator at Huntsman and Intermountain.
Welcome.
I'm Tomoko Tsukamoto. I'm also adolescent young adult patient navigator. Oh, for cancer patient.
Tomoko wins the best sweater.
Oh, this is the only time I can wear.
I'm Pat Rowe, Pediatric Care Manager with Select Health Insurance. Jen Boker, I'm at Memorial Intermountain Clinic with Pediatrics Care Manager.
I'm Carly, I am at Southridge Pediatrics as a care guide.
Walt Torres, Integrated Services, Utah Department of Health.
Karen Martinez, care coordinator, Integrated Services, Department of Health.
Eric Christensen, a program manager with Integrated Services.
Oh, we're just jumping back.
Yeah.
Heather Taster, I am the care coordinator for Wasatch Pediatrics in Draper.
Greg Hawks with James Mason Centers for Recovery. I do the community outreach.
Jeanette Tingy, I'm a care coordinator for Utah Valley Pediatrics Plaza.
Brothers, Utah Valley Pediatrics Provo office. I'm Cassie Crane. I'm a care coordinator at Wasatch Pediatrics South Point.
And Phil Farnworth, care coordinator at Willow Creek Pediatrics.
Oh, I'm smiling.
Gina Money, Utah Parent Center, Utah Family Services.
Tay Haynes with the resources on the medical home portal.
Dusty Frisbee, Care Coordinator, Wasatch Pediatrics Summit.
Liz Wall, Parent Partner, Summit Pediatrics.
Chuck Marlin, Director of
Linnea Bauer, I'm the Services Support Manager for the Medical Home Portal.
Jen Moore, and I'm
And I'm Amanda Lee. I'm also a care manager at Briner Pediatrics.
Wonderful. And we can't forget Wes. Wes, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Wes Smith, Care Coordinator with Tri-County Health Department in Vernal, Utah.
Wonderful. We're so glad you could join us. Sorry about the lack of food there.
So we also Elba Megana is on the phone. Elba, could you introduce yourself, please?
This is Nikki at Busy Pediatrics.
We just caught part of that. You want to try again?
This is Nikki at Busy Pediatrics.
Oh, hey, Nikki.
Hi, Nikki. We're happy to have you on the line.
Okay.
Great. Well, we've missed a few people, but I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, again, welcome, everyone. We're very happy you're here. Not wanting to advance. There we go. All right. So, happy holidays. I think most of you know where the bathrooms are located in this building. They're kind of central, so we came in from the eastward. They're a little bit farther into the building in that area. And the Blue Zone Network has guest Wi-Fi, and we took a long out of that. And we will be trying to end promptly at 9:59 because we go poof at 10 and West will disappear.
No.
So, yeah. We'll try and be prompt. All right. Okay, so just a few announcements. So we haven't done a shared directory effort in a little while, so we do actually have a list of UCCCN members information that is available to anyone who opts in to be able to see that and share their own. And so if you haven't gotten an email from us that has a few questions and basically asks you to say explicitly that you're okay with that, you'll be getting one. The week of January 2nd, we'll be sending that out. So you can watch for that. And if you don't want to, you don't have to respond. So don't worry about that. But we have a Google document that has all that contact information so that if you want to, you can contact individual people who have also agreed to that. So we have some updates on the Medical Home Portal. So we've been quite busy with content. So we have some clinical content that's updated, including our Turner Syndrome and Depression diagnosis modules. So we're pleased about that. And then we have a number of other pages that kind of go along and support those modules as well. We also have a brand new page, drooling in children with special health care needs. So that's in our for physicians and professionals section under common issues. So we're pleased about that one as well. And then we have an ongoing project right now. We have, I think, 13 or 14 pages that have already been touched in our for parents and families section. With regard to they're updated, they've been looked at for a health literacy level, trying to make that more appropriate for that audience. They've got a parent perspective that's been applied. Overall, we're trying to make them briefer, more consistent in format, and improved. And so that's a project that will be going on until all of those pages have been touched. And then we just wanted to let you know of a change that you may or may not have noticed, but I'll show it in just a second as well. So once upon a time, we developed the Medical Home Portal really with Utah in mind. That's where we're located. That's where the most services that we're aware of and have entered in the directory are. And so www.medicalhomeportal.org showed all of our Utah service providers kind of by default. So if you're looking at a content page, sometimes it will offer you service categories. And if you clicked in there, you would find Utah providers. Well, we now have 5 partner states plus Utah, and we recognize that sort of Utah-centric default is not really appropriate, and it took us a little while, but we finally enacted a fix to that so that if you're on www.medicalhomeportal.org, which we assume, people coming in from a Google search or people who aren't in one of our partner states might be doing, what they will see there is anything that's been designated as kind of a nationwide service provider. And so they often won't see a lot of information, but they'll have the option of clicking on one of those partner states, maybe Utah, maybe another one that might work better for them, or they'll just see mostly content, which has been written to be quite general. And so if you are looking for Utah service provider information and Utah-specific content, then we ask that you actually actively choose Utah as your region. That'll change the URL site. I'll show you that in just a minute. So, FYI. All right, so let's move into our brainstorming time. And so, as you guys know, this is the opportunity for you to share things with this group. Also, pick their brains if you need to. Look for resources. Look for people who have maybe had some experience dealing with a difficult case that might lend to something that you're working on now. We also love real positive things, so if you've had any motivational interviewing wins, any quality improvement projects that have been going on, anything like that, we love hearing about those updates, and we love hearing about any new resources that you may have come across. All right, so I'll open it up. Does anyone want to share anything? And this includes folks on GoToMeeting and people with us.
Okay, can I share the story? So now, Nicole and I are serving adolescent age children, 15 and above, sometimes 13 and above, for the cancer patient. And then a lot of people who may not be aware that many cancer treatment regimen would affect their fertility. And they will become infertile. And then also the provider, doctors, supposed to explain that before the treatment starts. But also some of the young adolescent comes with life-threatening, like time-sensitive that they need to start. And some would have some time and choice. And Nicole and I have been meeting with those patients and then navigating, helping them to preserve their sperm or eggs. But the problem is, right now, Utah does not require insurance company to cover those fees. And then for female, to have the egg stimulation medication would cost $4,000 to $8,000. And then just the procedure to retrieve the egg is about $85,100. And then also storage. So for the sperm, from $150 to $300 a month, to eggs, embryo to $475, around that much per year. And when I talk, they would say, on top of the cancer treatment fee, we cannot afford. Or some young men recently I talked to, sperm banking is much cheaper, but they said, or this boy said, I'm not thinking about that far ahead. And I said, this is the chance that you can preserve the sperm. And I gave the price, and we will try to find some resources for you too. But they said, this particular patient said, forget, I cannot afford, I cannot ask my parents. And so we are trying to go to the state legislature, and also we are working with Alliance for Fertility Preservation. But like we need many people's voice to be heard, and I will compile the articles and our patient's voice. But I just want everyone here to be aware what our patients are facing. And then we have an organization working together that they would cover almost 100% of that medication fee. If without their support, it would be $4,000 to $8,000. And those clinics that I talked to here in the Valley want like many places up front, or they will do medical loan. So I just want you to be aware, and then I may ask your support later to when we will have our group will have a special guest from Alliance for Fertility Preservation coming to speak to the cancer providers and our work groups in end of August. Not August, January.
End of January. Okay. Well, thank you for making us aware of that. I think that's probably something that people really think about, and it is a very time-sensitive issue,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else?
Jade joined us, Jade Porter.
Oh, welcome. Okay, well, I'll take this opportunity to show you our change on the website that I mentioned. So as you can see, we've got an image of the United States up here, and then this drop-down says nationwide, so that's because we're on www.medicalhomeportal.org, and then we can choose Utah here. See, a number of things have changed, and now we have the service directory for all of the service providers right here at the top.
Save their home site.
Right. Okay. So I'm not sure if you can see this very well. So right underneath the drop down, it gives you an option to set whatever state you've chosen as your home site, meaning that in the future, if you were to come to Medical Home Portal, for instance, from like a Google search, it thinks that you should go to www because that's kind of what we've designated as the main site to Google and other search engines. But saving it this way will allow the browser to know, oh, that's right, Utah is their home site. So you don't have to continually click that to change it again. So. All right. Okay, and then I had mentioned a couple of pages that are new or updated, so I'll just show you really quick while I've got this site up here. So in the For Physicians and Professionals tab, we have this section called Common Issues for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. So we continue to be adding information to this. And in fact, there might be a couple of pages on here that you're not aware of. This is a relatively new one as well. Some guidance around congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And here's the one that I mentioned is brand new. Drooling. Mentioned we have an update to our depression module. And also Turner syndrome. All right. Anyone else want to share anything? Any cases that you're having trouble with?
How many states have signed up for the Medical Home Portal?
So we currently have Utah and 5 other states that we partner with. Idaho is kind of a silent partner right now, but we're actively working with all the rest of these, and so their databases are growing. So if you were to go into the Montana Services Directory, for instance, that's definitely expanding. They're working hard on that. Nevada, and New Mexico, and so we enjoy having that kind of Intermountain group of states because we know that kind of helps with some overlap as people do travel across those states for services. Rhode Island, of course, a little different, but we love them. They're true East Coast kind of folks. They really push us. Very direct. They don't want to sit around. And so they are really helping us to improve the Medical Home Portal overall. So we feel really fortunate to have Rhode Island as a partner as well. And hope that we'll see more partners from all over the U.S. And as well. So a little bit of an outlier there. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and jump into our main presentation. So we're very fortunate today to have Gina Money.
Can we switch them up,
You bet.
actually,
Yeah.
so they can go first?
Okay, all right, so we're switching it up a little bit. So we're going to have Liz Wall and Dusty Frisbee from Summit Pediatrics come up and talk a little bit about what their practice is doing around transitioning patients to adult medical care. And if you want, I'll just do the...
Yeah, can you drive?
I can drive.
That would be awesome.
The one thing that would improve the audio is if I can have you guys kind of use that. I don't know if you want to just hold it.
Yes.
You can put it in Liz's face when she's... I think that'll be great.
That would be great.
Okay.
That would be awesome. So, okay, so we're talking about transition and kind of what it's looked like in our practice. I don't know, years and years ago when we were doing the original medical home UPIC project. Transition was one of those things that all of us decide we'd be really ambitious about, and we'd take that on. That was fun. We developed some letters and things like that to give out to patients. We sent letters out. We had them posted in rooms. You have to use this. You can't say anything unless I give this to you. We did invite providers out to lunch and stuff like that to try and get providers who would take our special kiddos. However, as most of you know, adult doctors don't come running when you say, hey, would you take our special kiddos? So what we ended up doing is we did have one good conversation with a provider who practiced upstairs from our clinic. And he said, you know what, I would be willing to take on some of these kiddos if I have a good history of them and a good summary. However, now he's retiring. So there went that. But what we really found with that part of the transition is it really works best if depending on where the kid's function level is, what their medical issues are, a lot of times as they're transitioning, if they can transition to college, then look in that college town, right? We start looking at where that expertise might be. Is there an internal medicine doctor? Making sure we have a good summary and that parents can help their child advocate for their health care, and make sure the kids, if they have that ability, can also describe their needs, that they can advocate for themselves. That becomes really important. Yeah, thank you. So in other things, transition varies widely. So I put up here just some, just the websites that we use. So the Utah Parent Center has a lot of great information. They've got videos parents can watch. Transition is anywhere from the high functioning autism to my Rett syndrome girls, right? And so I kind of want, you can just flip through those just because they're different. Like we use the portal a lot for transition because, again, it varies so much. And then there's gottransition.org, and we've used that site a lot too. So just so you guys have the resources I know about, there may be more out there. I'd love to know about them if you have them. But because it varies so much, I kind of like to talk about two ends of that spectrum. I have a little gal, we've got a little patient with Rett syndrome how old is she now? 20? Yeah. 20? 21? That's what I was thinking. 21. She was on our family council. Mom was on our family council a couple of years ago. And so Mom was right in the midst of transition. We had talked about guardianship because that was absolutely necessary for her. This child is nonverbal. She is wheelchair bound. She doesn't have trunk strength. She is fully dependent on the family. So as we're talking to Mom, I thought we had had some decent conversations ahead of this about what transition would look like for them. And all of a sudden, they have a younger daughter who had been providing kind of that respite type care or helping with care. But Mom says, well, geez, when Charlotte goes off to school, I need to find a place for Abby to go. So I think that there's got to be like a daycare where she can go where they'll interact with her and she can be part of the activities. And I know what's available in my area, and I've been to some other facilities, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily lacking, but the quality is highly variable. And this child doesn't have like really heavy, she's G-tube fed, but other than that, she needs somebody who interacts with her because she doesn't seek out interaction, right? And so Mom thought, well, somebody will interact with her. So as we started having this discussion, and it was after a family council meeting, I said, as you look into different facilities, I said, you really want to look at them critically to see what they have to offer and really what life will look like for your daughter. And Mom, and I didn't I've seen different facilities. Mom left in tears. She was devastated. But we had also in the past talked about DSPD and respite services and stuff like that. But Mom works full time. Dad works full time. Their younger daughter will go off to college, which Mom and Dad were planning on paying for. But all of a sudden, I think it put a wrench in their, like, in what their view was, because they just kind of thought, you know, there's something out there. Well, in our area, again, I know what the facilities look like, and if she put her in a facility up by where we're at, there are so many behavior issues. There's field trips that they take their residents on, which is great for those people. But she would end up in a common room, most likely with a TV on. If she's not getting meds and she's otherwise fine, I don't know how much interaction she would get, which is why I told Mom, look at it critically, have that conversation. That's a really hard conversation to have and really devastating for Mom. So that's one end of transition, right? So we'd already talked about all the services, but what this really looks like for a family is quite different, I think, than what they picture in their heads. The other family that I kind of would like to talk about, this young man, his name's Grant, high-functioning autism. Not a lot of medical need, but he's also doesn't function at a high enough level that he will ever live fully independently. This young man, parents happen to be divorced, but Mom has financial and medical guardianship. Because she'll always have to have her hands in that part. He was a candidate to go off to school, and so he went to Boston to a program that had a school that had a strong autism program. They had visited the campus. They had really looked into what supports were available there. There was a strong peer mentoring program, and he did really well there for about the first 6 months. And then we ran into some odd behavior things that he had done really well in the high school. So that the behaviors were kind of unanticipated. And so he's now back home with Mom. And so even though they had a good plan and they had the resources, transition, I don't know, I feel like it's the most difficult thing that we ever talk about. I feel like it's the most difficult thing that we ever try and help parents through, from finding a new provider to finding what services are appropriate for that family. So our family council, the year that I had the conversation with the mom that put her in tears,
she never came back.
She did not, although we have talked to her. We've talked to her several times. It was quite devastating for her. And I've talked to her and I've talked to Dad, and they're doing well. But what they had come up with, and this is what had spurred this conversation, is we had started talking about what do you need, and what their need is I need to know when I need what services. And we have a list of all the providers, service providers, state agencies. I have one that's autism specific and one that's general special needs, because I find that those are almost two different topics. And so, but they're like, well, yeah, you give us this list, but when do I need these things? Like, I need these things when I need them, and I don't always think to call you when I need them, right? So I end up searching for them anyway. So if there's a way we could kind of get this every time we come in for a well visit, that would be great. So what our project ended up being was this. This is a transition timeline from birth. This one's through age 11. But we had an old, was it ARC, that had the original publication. And so this is actually amended from that original publication with services that are applicable, for today. And so I am not the best with layouts, so this is what you see is what you get. If anybody wants to improve on this, please do and share it back to me. But what it talks about how to encourage independence at kind of across the age span, and then what the possible support services are. And then we can write in additional ones as needed or as they seek them out, depending on what's appropriate. So for this age, depending on where they're at, early intervention, getting on the DSPD list, maybe the Child Developmental Center is appropriate, Social Security disability, right? So these are things that they may be looking at. Shriners Hospital, Utah Parent Center, Family Voices, the portal, like things that if they know about those things early, it will help guide them better, right? Can you switch to the next slide, please? So this is the one for older kids. I think I did a little better on the layout for this one. Again, how to encourage independence. So for those that have the cognitive ability to know what medications they're taking, what's the name of their condition, how does it affect them, how can they advocate for themselves. It's really important that they take as much ownership of that as possible, so that if they have the ability to communicate it, right, or to understand it, because they may be put in a situation where they have to communicate it or they have to understand it. It may be something happens and mom's not right there, or dad's not right there, or their support person's not right there. And then possible, support services. So, and this just goes through, like USOR, UCAT, comprehensive care, which I probably need on the other one anyway, Guardianship Associates of Utah, SSI work incentives, assisted living, DSPD adult services. And then we talk to parents about, okay, as your child turns 18, when they were in school in the special education system, they just get those services. They're entitled to them. They get them. As soon as they're after 18, you have to advocate for them. You have to show that they need them. And I know that nothing changed other than you're in adult services. And that's a really difficult transition for families. So Liz, as you know, or as you may know, is a parent partner in our clinic. And she really gives our clinic unique insights to all the different systems, to as she crosses different bridges, things that we may need to be considerate of. And so her daughter happens to be coming up on adult transition. And she talks to our families about. So I'm going to have her give her unique perspective and share some of the family's perspective on transition.
The next slide up. So this is our redhead Lottie, with her dad's glasses upside down, obviously. And she is a 17-year-old Down syndrome child. She will be turning 18 this fall, so I'll let you know how our transition goes. We'll be seeking guardianship. And I feel as though I have a really good handle on that. Probably, maybe. We'll see how it goes. So I wear two hats, really, because I'm a parent, obviously, of this child with special needs. And our family, as Dusty said, has gone through a lot of systems. We're going through more systems. Transition for us isn't just okay, we're transitioning to adult care. Okay, transitioning to this. It's all the transitions you go through with a special needs child. So that includes at age 16, she's not driving. That includes, maybe when she was born, my biggest concern was she wouldn't go to prom. Crazy as it sounds, that was really hard for me, thinking she wasn't going to date. She wasn't going to do these normal transitions that my other two daughters would do. So transition, although it is a word and it's something that you guys as providers look at for families as, they're transitioning to adult care, it's not always that for families. And then I wear another hat at the clinic, because I'm employed by our clinic, to talk to our families and be there to kind of let them know what they have ahead of them, or get the information from a family who all of a sudden faces this stark reality that they're going to stick their child in a room with no interaction. So one of the things that I can say about that, and our family council, we have this great group of parents that come once
a month, pretty much. I'd say close to once a month. They come to the clinic, we provide dinner, and we actually talk about different issues that they would like to see our clinic handle, you know, whatever the suggestion is. Whether or not we can provide that after we go back to the docs is a different deal, but we actually try to engage them in what we can do to improve the clinic. The first 2 family councils were all special needs parents. So those people have definitely become friends of our clinic in a different way. And it was surprising to me to hear these special needs parents, because I know when we were with Lottie, in the very beginning, if you had handed me that worksheet of this is what you need to be looking at, and these are all the transitions, I would have been like, you can take that back. I am not interested in looking at any of that right now. I'm more concerned about prom. So transition for every single parent looks different, because these younger parents that were on this family council were like, we want every bit of information at the very get-go. I know in our case, we couldn't have handled that. We had enough going on. I couldn't have handled looking at that. John, my husband, wouldn't be like, no. But for them, interestingly enough, they wanted everything right up front. They wanted all the resources, all the information, and they wanted it ahead of time. So it wasn't just, oh, at 2 years old, this is what you should be doing for your child. At 3 years old, this is what you should be doing for your child. They wanted it like, you know, ahead. They wanted the doctors to be in the room saying, here, this is for you at the very first visit. And that's interesting to me because, again, that wasn't our experience at all. And interestingly enough, so I had lunch the other day with a dad who's a friend of the clinic, and he was on the family council. I don't know what her diagnosis is, but she's in a wheelchair. And
Glutaric acidemia type 1. Glutaric acidemia type 1.
Okay. So anyway, she's nonverbal. And yeah, so she has a lot of needs. She's 24/7 needs care. So Dad and I are talking, and I said, we were talking about DSPD actually, and I said, would you have ever known what this was? He said, no. Why would I need to know that? I'm like, well, you don't need to know it until you need to know it. And even with this family where we feel like we're plugged in and they have resources, he's looking at me like, this is such a foreign system. This is only one system out of all of these systems we have to navigate. So the information from my perspective for these families is critical. Anything you can give them. And apparently they want it ahead of time. Not every family, but I think a lot of them do. So anyway, it was just interesting to me that he was in this place of like, I wouldn't know what this was. Why would I know what this was? Well, interestingly enough, tomorrow he's coming into the office for Dusty and I to sit down. One of the services we provide is we're going to actually help you with DSPD paperwork because it's lofty. I've said this before in this room, but I can't even tell you how lofty this is. And he turns to me and says, well, you know, I'll just come in and we'll just like get a page and do it. And I'm like, you better download it ahead of time because it's pretty thick. So anyway, transition, I guess my point in being up here is so different for every family. When you guys get this information like, okay, this is transition, this is what we need to have for this family, just take into account every family's at a different place. Every family, whatever their transition looks like, as the 2 cases that Dusty said, is different. So, do you want me to say anything else?
No. Okay. Gina, help. No. So I don't know. So maybe just to wrap up, there are transition workbooks. Some families that works for, great. We can have checklists, and even with the checklist, we'll miss things for families. I wish it was like a one size fits all. I haven't found that it is. If somebody has like the best checklist out there for transition, I would love to see it because I find that even when I go through those things that I know I need to touch, I tend to miss something for a family. Sometimes we make assumptions about whether or not they need voc rehab or DSPD, or we assume the school has taken care of the voc rehab piece and they didn't. So I would also encourage you not to make those assumptions, but I know we all do. So, yes, Dawn.
I was just going to ask if you are documenting all of your transition, because like you said, it starts from when they first come. Do you have one place in your EHR where all of that checklist is templated. So
I
you
haven't
can
shown
kind of,
you our EMR, have I?
No.
It is not that great. Oh yeah. Okay. So we don't have one place to document it. We can provide notes within our EMR, but once those are saved as a note, you can't build upon them, right? And so that's a limiting thing within our EMR. I don't know. All of them have their different limitations, right? We do, as Liz just reminded me, we do pre-visit phone calls, and we do gather a lot of information about where parents are in those transition pieces with those pre-visit phone calls. When a child is 16, 17, we start asking about transition issues. Guardianship in particular. We used to try and ask earlier. However, we would kind of get that blank look or dead silence, and because people aren't quite there yet. Their child's 14, so they're dealing with, okay, we're transitioning into high school, and there's a lot of transition there. And what do you mean guardianship? I don't know if they're going to need support once they turn 18. So anyway, okay, it's all you.
Thanks, you guys. That
Thank
was great.
I have to thank them because it never fails. I call us the three amigos because every time I'm like, I gotta present, will you come and do it? So a lot of what I'm going to go over is you'll see is a little bit of a repeat. And again, I think all of our minds, we talk and breathe transition right now. And in the staff at the Parent Center, a good majority of them have children that are going through or have just recently have transitioned. And I said, if you have one word or a sentence to, say to care coordinators and practices, what would it be? And they all, unfortunately, it was like, transition sucks. That's how it is. And part of it is Liz kind of mentioned this, is the systems are so siloed. Finding adult health care providers is not an easy thing to do, as we all know, because we were talking on the way in about that. And transition in the world of all of our typical kids, if you think about it, it's rites of passage. It's exciting. Independence is coming. And for those of us that have children with special needs, those rites of passages become those milestones again that we miss, and we're just trying to look towards the future and make the best life possible. From my perspective, the biggest thing was if and when I was not able to provide my child a safe place at home, and that I could help do the cares and coordinate everything. My biggest fear was my child becoming a bed number. And so many parents actually have said, I just need to know, regardless of how challenging it is, that the thing we need most is that our children are safe and healthy. And as I go through, I will try to remember to say youth, young adult. It's hard for me because even as old as my children are, they're my kids. And so I say kids a lot. So I don't mean to be disrespectful to the youth and young adults. That's just the mom coming out in me. So as we go, when we talk about everything, and, this morning, as we were walking in, we were talking about how complicated transition is, because we're talking medical transition, but really, you're talking about all the social determinants of health to make sure that, this now youth, young adult has the best chance of life as possible with as much independence as possible. So the theme through here is hopefully giving you some resources and such to make some of this a little bit easier. But regardless of the abilities of the child, we want to make sure that there's as much independence as possible for that individual. And some parents have said, but, there's my child's nonverbal, total care and such. And I said, can your child give a yes or no, whether that's through eye blinks, head nod? And, they'll say, yeah, we can usually, it might be a behavior. And I said, there you go. That gives that individual the independence that, at that level, that hopefully as you're making decisions for the lifelong care and independence of this individual, that if there's a yes or no, that is powerful. And parents have walked away and just crying and saying, I've never thought about that. A yes, no, regardless of how much other communication there is a way to have them have a voice in how their future goes. So these are some of the things that I'm just going to go over quickly. Some of the things you'll see are repeats from Dusty and Liz, and I've put in there where you can get more information and such on these topics. So, of course, we're all talking about these medical transitions, and so not just from your practice, but for those kids that have many specialists. They're seen usually at Primary Children's if they've got complex health issues. And so it's helping those families start to develop the questions to ask. And one of the main questions is, again, since nothing is streamlined, is what age is transitioned from your practice, from the hospital, from this clinic. So I will use Jody at my office, and she said I could use her story, is Jacob just recently turned 18 this year. Yeah, Jacob. I know, remember? And we'll get into a little bit because his story is pretty powerful when we start talking a little bit about guardianship in a second. But for him, he's pretty complex. He's wheelchair bound. He has cerebral palsy. He has cystic fibrosis. He has a seizure disorder. Luckily, that's been controlled for many, many years. But he's very, very verbal and can help direct his care. But as we were going, and we knew transition was coming up, and we were teaching and sponsoring guardianship classes. And so we were doing all of this, we thought, she works at Parent Center, she knows this. Well, all of a sudden, the CF clinic's like, after 18, sorry, you're out of here. With no, because within the practice she's been in, they have been very, supporting and such, and information comes a little bit beforehand, and they can make decisions together as a team. Well, I'm not knocking the CF clinic, but we had no idea. And all of a sudden it was like, you've got to go to the University of Utah. And that took them back so much because they thought even though he turned 18, they had a little bit of time, they needed to get through what they were going through in their piece of guardianship. They needed to start looking to say, where are we going to start looking for a medical home for an adult with these complex conditions? Never even thought about the specialty care piece of it. So it was like baptism by fire. He unfortunately just in the last few months spent about 6 weeks out of 2 months in the hospital because of everything that's going around. And so they were very pleased actually with the university, how they treated him, asking him questions, how they really did practice family-centered care. They made sure all of the documents for releases of information were in place, but they had gone through some guardianship, so everything was set there. The only thing that she will say was a nightmare was the ER, and we know that that's true probably of all ERs. We're just so spoiled because primary kind of triages that. If you've got a very susceptible, chronically ill special needs child, then there are mechanisms in place to protect that individual from everything that's happening in the ER, which usually is all the viruses and everything else. That didn't happen, and in fact, while they were there, it was 24 hours in the ER the second time, where Dad was sleeping on the floor and trying to keep a mask on him and they had a lockdown because of an exposure that come in. And so that was, their second time in the adult healthcare system. And Jody just come to work and just cried for about 2 days because she said, we don't have any other options. We are in the adult health care system now. And so knowing us, we've made some calls and said there needs to be some protocols set up for anybody that comes in that is very much at risk. Everybody in the ER, they need to triage. We understand that. We've been there, done that, and know that there's been times that it's been our kids that have had to move to the top of the list because of the emergency. That's not it. It's just have some protocols in place so that they're not leaving or getting more sick while they're there. And so those are some of the things that I think as care coordinators and practices is that kind of look at that list of the specialty providers and the hospital and such because their transition ages may have a hard stop. I know Spina Bifida Clinic also has a hard stop. And another former employee that we had, her son was seen in Spina Bifida Clinic. They had made those transition plans, had gone to LDS Hospital. Well, he could very much direct his own care. Didn't even think about, this was not a family that would have thought about guardianship. But he ended up with a very severe and significant infection to where he was not able to direct his own care. Mom got up to LDS Hospital and they wouldn't give her any information. And it was one of those lessons learned again that even if you don't get guardianship, talk to families about, and of course the individuals, because maybe it's not their parents that they want to give information to if they can direct their own care. But to have a release of information, with those providers, because that way it was such a scary situation. We had to get legal involved in all of that because, again, the hospital was doing what they have to do. But for a mom that's seeing her, because it didn't matter whether he was an adult now, that was still her baby boy, and she could not get information about what was going on. So we also tell families it's like there is a continuum, but there always needs to be somebody that can get information and speak on behalf. And I know that we talked about, even advanced directives, but this is going a little bit further in making sure there's releases of information if there's not.
Can I just interject something just along those lines? And if the child does go on for education, additional education, college or whatever, make sure you get those FERPA releases signed. I went up with my kid to the university who isn't special needs, and they banned me to the nether regions of the office when we were trying to talk to the department up there. So make sure you get that signed so parents can be involved in.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that one up. It also applies, so I'm glad when we get to Voc Rehab, but I wouldn't have thought about the FERPA one, because even with Voc Rehab, if they're individuals that are directing their own care, they're making their own decisions, if they do not give permission for their parents to be involved in that conversation, Voc Rehab cannot talk to the parents. But yet, usually, in a lot of these cases, the decisions that this person's making affects the family, because it's like, oh no, I'm not moving out of my house, but no, this is how I want things. And so it's like, okay, talk to them gently about you need to work with your family. So, and then mental health, and we also talk about a lot of these things that you think that are given, but it is amazing when we've had, again, parents talk about, we've never even thought about, we just thought that was common sense for some of these individuals was the personal hygiene. And so all of these things that they need continuing education on at whatever level they're at, again. And that may be very limited. And again, a yes, no, that can you tell me when you need to be changed versus, so that because again, you have a lot more people usually coming into their life in the adult healthcare system as well. So the one that I want to make sure is we've done a lot of focus groups with young people with disabilities, and their main concern actually is, and this has been on varying levels of cognition, is nobody's ever told me about healthy relationships and sexuality. And as the moms, it's like, they want to know about sex still, and they do. And it's as all of our information and some of the workshops we've given, it's like, this is a natural development of all, humans. It's just part of who you are. So there are some great information sites out there, and we've done a little bit. There's more that is out there now through, as when I talk about the Parent Center and Family Voices, there's at least one in every state. And so some of our other states have developed some wonderful pieces of information that have been parent approved, professional approved, and such, that we're going to start trying to get a hold of and Utahizing it, because that we have to do it different here. So in fact, every time when I worked for the Department of Health and I was working on healthy sexuality, I couldn't send any emails because it'd block me. I had to come up with other words. And then the most important thing is making sure that there's always that up-to-date medical history as they're getting older, and there may be other people involved, and they're in different settings than what they're used to. So with maintaining the health, this is just kind of some of the stuff we all know, other than making sure even more so that there is some information on them at all times, and that might be that medical summary. Even if they could have some type of a little bit lengthier care notebook, because what I like to say about some type of, and people do it electronically, but having some paper on an individual that may need assistance because they can't speak for themselves or know everything that needs to happen, this is kind of like the instruction manual to that individual. And so if there is an emergency, that there is that immediate information, at least the pertinent information, if all of a sudden something happens and the people closest to that individual cannot be reached or not around, or we live in Utah, or a natural disaster. We want to, people kind of stick their heads in the sand when we talk about that, but that has been another big concern of individuals with disabilities. It's like, we already know, we've heard that when something happens, individuals with disabilities are really going to have to count on their neighbors, friends, and family because of the way the emergency system works. So we want to make sure that they have information on them, that if a neighbor all of a sudden is helping them, if it's now a young man with autism that is terrified of certain things, say the color red, and just that there's that information on there, that if this individual is hiding, there is some good information of maybe helping, that child or that individual in that circumstance. Many young individuals, regardless again of disability, have smartphones or smartwatches. This has been something that we've been trying to promote for years and years and years, is to program ICE into their phones. This come from the bombings in the train station in, London, where they were trying to get a hold of the next of kin, or, if they survived but were in the hospital. This was a way that they could immediately look at, because this is, if you type it that way, then that's the person that they can get in touch with and be reached in an emergency, or something comes up that they really need to know about. So I realize it doesn't work for all, but it has been a great tool across the country. So the financial piece, as we said, our children now all of a sudden turn 18 and they're that age of majority, and their disability hasn't changed, their circumstances haven't changed, the finances haven't even changed, but all of a sudden you have to reapply for everything. You're going from basically entitlement to eligibility as far as some of these pieces are. And so when a child may have Medicaid, and when I say Medicaid, just traditional Medicaid, they've qualified on family income. When that child turns 18 and now is a young adult, they have to reapply for Medicaid on their own income and assets. And so it's helpful for families because they are not looking at the whole family income again. That makes it so families can now take those job promotions or have, a second income come in. And that is true with SSI. If the child is on SSI for disability and getting some financial assistance, soon as that child turns 18, that now young adult has to reapply. There is actually even a difference in how they look at disability from a child to an adult. So it's important, again, they're looking at their own income, their own assets, and there are a lot more pieces to that that's helpful that could take up the whole hour, so I'll leave that there. But the other pieces that families really need to know about is like special needs trust, ABLE accounts, benefits counseling. And I'm going to say the special needs trust, that is so that if there can be money set aside in a trust that won't affect the young adult's benefits, and be able to provide other things like I shouldn't try to talk too much on this because I haven't taught this for a while, but so those things that Medicaid doesn't pay for is what a special needs trust can pay for. ABLE accounts, if somebody was to ask me, I would go with an ABLE account any day over a special needs trust. And part of it is more latitude. The special needs trust is not that individuals. That is a trust with those that have, been set up to be trustees, and they can actually determine how it's paid and such. Where an ABLE account is actually that individuals. There is a change in coming this year, which is exciting for those that, because they can put up to, I think, $15,000 a year in it. So if you have family members or there was a trust or something, money inherited, it can go into that. If a young adult is working, they can actually add another, I think, I got to think about this, like 13,000. And so they can, I don't know where they're getting their money if they can, but because I know I couldn't save this much a year, but they can save up to 27,000 plus a year if they have a small job and such that can go into this, ABLE account, of course, and that will help provide for that for the future, which is giving families so much more relief that there is now these accounts that can take care of them in the event that they cannot.
That's coming in 2019.
The extra, yes,
above and beyond.
Above the and there can be up to $100,000 in there. Without after it goes past that, then of course that will start affecting benefits.
Previously, it was a very minimal amount. It wasn't.
It was 15,000, I think, or 13,000. I have the numbers, but there's. I think that people started talking about, it's like, okay, now you have even young adults working, they're still not maybe making a whole lot, but they can at least add to it. And as long as they're working, that's the stipulation, that the young adult has to be working to have that higher amount. Real quick, benefits counseling is a resource through vocational rehabilitation. And what that helps is if an individual gets a job, they can know where their limits are before it starts affecting those much needed health benefits such as Medicaid or SSI. And where we found that it's been very helpful, because this does happen and it's exciting, if two individuals that have disabilities get married, it almost wipes out their benefits because of how they count them. And so benefits counselors are great at knowing all of those rules, laws, the amounts, and all of that. So it's something that not many people know, and I know that, again, they probably have their long waiting list because this does come through the DWS, Department of Workforce Services, which houses vocational rehabilitation and such. So, and then Medicaid, the changes to Medicaid that are coming April 1st, and I kept thinking, oh, the Medicaid expansion is not really going to affect our population. What it actually is going to do is for those adults that are either that they're on disability Medicaid because they're, not fitting any criterias of other programs and such, it come April 1st with the Medicaid expansion. Those individuals can actually qualify for Medicaid without the disability, because disability Medicaid, it's about 100% of poverty level. With the increase come April 1st, it's 138%. So they can make more and get benefits. So it is going to help some of our population.
This is off that a little bit, but did the Medicaid funding that's going through, is that going to help with the disability waivers or anything like that?
No, the Medicaid expansion is just expanding this to basically the adult population, so those without children and those that had no other access. So if my daughter's a great example, she's got some chronic health conditions, and when she started into college, we're on the marketplace, so we had to get her own insurance. And so she applied, and because there's very little income, it kept kicking her in the marketplace, kept kicking her back out. You qualify for Medicaid. Well, because she's a young adult with no children, she wasn't eligible. So it's going to cover that portion. We're estimating about 100,000 individuals that it's going to, and with that, because now that it will increase other populations as well, because they'll start doing a lot of outreach and enrollment. So I'll just do it now. One of the things that's exciting, so this is my legislative piece, is the governor's budget just come out the 1st of December. We were waiting and holding our breath. It is awesome. It's awesome. The only thing is, once the legislature gets a hold of it, they usually just throw it away and then start working from there. The governor's budget has in it to bring so many people off the waiting list for the Division of Services for People with Disabilities, which is huge, because I think we're back up to about 3,000 on the waiting list. But they have approved, because there's been this legislative study over the last year, to try to fully fund the waiting list in some aspects, but with that, it's because of developing a new limited supports waiver. What that means is currently anybody that's on the waiting list for DSPD, it's like once you get off that waiting list, you have this array of services. And yes, it's a sore subject with Liz right now, but they set up a budget, and so those with more intense needs, they get day services. They may need in-home behavioral supports. They're very, very expensive services and supports because they're usually one-on-one. Not all of our families need that. It's the access to the extended health care. It's the access to respite. It's access to some of those vital things just for the activities of daily living and for that family support. So that's what the department has proposed. It's like we could save so much money because unfortunately how the system works, and this is the fault of the system. When everybody gets this big budget, it's like, regardless of what your needs are, you get this big budget. So we're spending a lot of money on things that families may not need, but they use because they're afraid they're going to lose the services if they don't. So it's not the family's fault, it's the system's, the way it was designed. So It's going to be a long, hard fight for us come January through March. But it's the first time in history that we've seen where they really want to say, we need to do something about this now. And we have quite a few legislators that are brand new that we're going to have to educate. Quite a few legislators that don't believe in this, that believe in take care of your own. It's, disability is not our issue. So it is going to be a hard fight, but we're going to fight really hard. The other thing we are going to do is let families know that I know you don't want to apply. It's a hefty application process, and there's a waiting list, and why even do it? Do it. Because we need not only the governor, but the legislature to know how many of our family members are out there and needing supports and services. And, the biggest thing is that access to medical care. More to come on that, me. So the legal piece of it, of course, is the age of majority that we just talked about. And I was going to look at the clock, wherever it went. Okay, so I'm going to fly through these. But the important pieces for all people with disabilities, including children, but definitely for adults with disabilities, is the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, because that's what prevents them from discrimination. So if you have patients that, their goal is to try to live independently. And when I say that, that could mean somewhere without their parents. And there might have supports and such. And there are all these laws with ADA and 504 that if it's an employer or a private business with 15 employees or above, or they accept any federal funding, they have to abide by the ADA and Section 504. If they are being discriminated against housing, so there's an apartment for rent, but they see that it's two individuals that are going to move in together, they have pretty significant disabilities and decide not to rent to them. It's not just the Federal Housing Authority, FHA will, and there's a line to call them and all of that. So there's some great protections through the ADA and Section 504. Guardianship, we talked a little bit about. I will say that's all we have been promoting and teaching. We have stepped back, and we have Adults with Disabilities, and we have the Developmental Disabilities Council, among others, saying, you know what, guys, you need to make sure that you are giving everything. So we are. We're starting to, and there will be a link to it. Individuals with disabilities have said, we want supported decision making. We don't want guardianship. We don't want somebody making all of our decisions. And so we will... and it'll be later, but there's a booklet that you can download. It says My Voice Counts. It kind of goes through that to kind of check and see what the differences are for that individual. Maybe it's not full guardianship. And Jacob, this is where I wanted to bring Jacob back into. When they went, if you do full guardianship, that individual loses his or her right to vote, to there was a couple of different things, and Jacob's like, he's not real fond of our current administration. He wants a voice in that, and so so they went with limited because, of course, he's going to need full care for a lot of his needs, but he can make his decisions. So they went with a limited guardianship. Jody said, I wish they would have known more about the supported decision making, because I think we could have done some things legally without having to even take some of the other, his decisions away. But knowing their family, they're going to make it work. And so I want to put out there, as we keep telling, I even told, we went and did a presentation for primary, and I said, because they weren't promoting guardianship, and we got scared because we knew the cases where they turned 18 and then all of a sudden parents were locked out of any information. It's like, no, we need to make sure that, there's a process. And so there is a process, but there's just, now there's choices depending on, and again, as they said, transition, guardianship, it's individualized. You can't just do the blanket statement anymore. So, it's there, but I will, Yeah, and it's at the end. So this piece, I'm just going to say, we talked about voc rehab, and they're supposed to be going into the schools starting at 14. We know it doesn't work, and some voc rehab counselors are great. Others, as my staff would say, suck. And Jody's is one of them. And so we found out recently that the Disability Law Center has a client assistance program called CAP that you can call. And if you're not getting what you need, and they're not being responsive, the Disability Law Center has a program specifically to help navigate the
This is another reason why DSPD is really important for these kids to get on, because they'll also have that caseworker plus Department of Workforce Services, and then it becomes a big team effort instead of just about rehab.
Sometimes.
Ideally.
Yeah, and DLC, and because they're funded under DLC and DSPD, they're funded under the same DD Act. They have to work together as well. The other piece of being on DSPD as an adult, if you meet that eligibility and criteria, they have big employment projects going on, customized employment for some of those individuals that people say, how can they even work? There we've got some great videos up there of, there is the array of pieces that individuals can get from there. And then I just want to mention this real quick. I would say as your families are transitioning, ask them, say, has the school talked about graduation and what that means? Because some have not been told that, if, because some want to just have that experience of the graduation, getting the diploma. Once they get the diploma, they're not eligible for post-high. They cannot graduate and get a diploma if they want to go to school up till age 22. And then the housing, I'm going to just say that there's those things and the resources, everything that I'm talking about. There's more information on the Utah Parent Center and the medical home portal. So these are just things to start, if possible, start talking about, because especially with subsidized housing, another one of those, Section 8, long waiting list. But the important thing to know is they do have special categories for individuals with disabilities in their wait lists. And the statewide independent living centers are a huge resource to make adaptations, to make accommodations and such for independent living. Transportation, there's a great on the medical home portal. We've titled it, I think, Where's My Ride? And so there's some great information in there. I know that you guys all talked about Uber and Lyft in one of the last, and they really are expanding in areas not just for medical appointments. The self-advocacy is the piece that I really, really want to tell you to look a little bit more into. So as we're talking, we really need young adults to know what their disability is, what the name of it is, and as much as possible be able to talk about that. But we also want them to know that self-disclosure and identification, there's laws. An employer, like if they were going to, they do not have to talk about and disclose their disability. The second piece of that, though, is when they're working, if there is a disability, they do want to disclose what they need, because then that allows for them to provide accommodations. And there's some really good information on the Parent Center website as well about how to self-disclose, when to self-disclose, because unfortunately we also have a lot of fraud and our young adults are very much taken advantage of. So we really try to protect and let them know and educate them who and when to disclose this information to. Because if they're like my kids, they're telling everybody. And it's like, not so good. And so their self-advocacy skills is probably one of the most important pieces that we can all work on. You can go to the next. And I just kind of said this before, regardless everybody wants to have control in their lives because it's their life, and just to try to build on their strengths. And even an individual that has significant intellectual disabilities and such has some things that they absolutely love. And we're talking about maybe some day programs then that they can get into, that there's something about that hobby, that love or whatever, that can be supported. And I will send out information along later because it's a whole nother subject, but we were talking about some of these places that are not great, for day programs and day services. There's a new law. It's coming. We're working on it. It's called the settings rule. And so these places are going to have to give individuals choices of what they want to do, how they want to do it, options in these individual or in these group settings. And if not, then the places will shut down. And it's a very hot, controversial issue right now. This next one is for you all. Long link is from Got Transition and AAP. It just came out, I want to say March or May, but there's some codes in there to help you all in for transition that may help with billing. And so it's I think a 19 or 20 page document that you can download, and it may be very helpful in practice. We have some short videos, and unfortunately the links aren't showing up like they're supposed to, and we weren't going to play them, but these are that can be referred to for families and young adults because they're kind of cartoonish and such, and talking about just the basics of what they need to know to kind of further their information that they need.
We'll send those out.
Yeah.
Send the links out.
Yeah. And we have a Healthy Transition Notebook, which is a lot like the CARE notebook for families, but this is developed and we kind of tried to make it look a little bit cooler for youth and young adults. And I want to say that you can find it right now. I found out that it's got a very bad link and it's unformatted, so I will send that link out later. And then the Utah Parent Center has fact sheets, webinars, videos, everything you can think of, from adult services to guardianship to, just family resources, on and on and on. Very well done. They're also being revamped because as soon as we got them done, of course, some of the laws changed. So same thing as we do those, we'll do them on the portal. And then medical home portal resources. These are all the things you can find, and they're also being updated as we go, but there's still great information. And we are being pushed because of Rhode Island. I have to admit, some of the things, it's like, oh my gosh, who wrote that? And I'm like, I did. So it's okay. It's just making the information better and better every day. And some of these are just quotes from parents that within transition about what they're hoping that their medical offices can help with, care coordinators and such. Part of it is all of that documentation to be able to share, because that has been some of the hurdles even when applying for services is, DSPD, everybody requires all this psychological testing, this and this and this, and you guys can get it a lot quicker than the parents. The parents, they send through all of these circles and all of that, and we know that you guys have the power to probably usually make one call and get it versus, and we just, of course, we're already going through transition and trauma, so that would be helpful. So this is it. This is sometimes patients become a little attached, but really it's us parents that are attached to you guys. And there was actually even a focus group done by Dr. Terashima that the kids were great. They had been to doctor after doctor. The parents are the ones crying, I can't let you go. So just look at it as you're really transitioning as parents that, yeah, I won't say anymore. You see me. And then the last slide is just a feel-good slide to let the day go, is nothing's impossible. The word itself says I'm possible. So thank you for listening. And I know that's a lot, and transition is so complicated, but there is great resources. They listed the same ones that we use. Parent Center, Got Transition, and the Medical Home Portal are the 3 best places to get some of this. And
could you define or explain the difference, supported decision making? I'm not at all familiar with that.
so they're on the Parent Center website. This will talk a little bit more about it. And it's different. It's not having somebody end up being your guardian to take it. There's still going to be some legal things, but it's more like some of those releases of information, putting it out there on who gets to make decisions, but it's not determined by a judge, where guardianship is absolutely, their rights are kind of taken away. So this is why this was developed by our Developmental Disabilities Council and Young Adults here in Utah, but it's a nationwide. There's a supported decision-making actual national center. This booklet itself is on our, the link's in there, and we'll get them into there, but it's also on the Parent Center. You could just search My Voice Counts, and it comes right up, and you can download it.
I think, Eva, you touched some on this with the difference of how children transitioning into adults are taken care of as children, probably more so. We kind of cloister and support them more. Even as simple as going to the primary care physician, if you're lucky enough to get somebody with an adult provider, is the family really needs to understand how that practice works, because pediatricians, for the most part, will have same-day access for sick.
Yes.
Adults don't necessarily have that in the same practice.
That is the biggest issue.
Yeah, and so there might be an expensive ED visit as a result of not being able to get into the adult provider. Also, just understanding that the whole thing is so different. And there's been a lot of frustrations with parents not realizing how different it is. So I think that maybe they need to sometimes, as they're scheduling, kind of interview that office and understand that office better.
Yes. In fact, it's in the little video short clip, and it has some questions to ask too, because that's what we tell families is, even if it's an internal medicine office and such, an emergency that usually in our pediatrics office, they're back to us by the end of that day.
Yep.
We found that it could be 2 weeks sometimes. And so, of course, the emergency room usage shoots way up because we can't wait. And when there's something going on, so that is an issue. And how we've found providers, because again, it's hard. You just kind of have to call, interview, but it is from parent-to-parent referrals. And so we kind of hook them up with other parents. We will give a few names, but we redo it off the clock and say, this is some recommendations from other families. We have to have you check them out because we can endorse, and because we know that.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, it varies.
Part of that, in my former career as a kidney transplant coordinator at Primaries, we were working on a transition document that had questions like, it was a little more, specific to diagnosis. So it was like, who's your what's your coordinator?
Your meeting has ended.